Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today we are going to learn about the regulation of blood pressure and GFR by the kidney. The blood pressure is highly affected by the GFR. GFR is the glomerular filtration rate, and the blood pressure is highly affected by the glomerular filtration rate. How the blood pressure is affected by the GFR, we will learn it in this lecture. In this lecture, we will also learn that how the blood pressure and the glomerular filtration rate is regulated by the kidney. Four mechanisms are there for the regulation of blood pressure and GFR. And number one, the myogenic mechanism. And number two, the neural mechanism. And number three, the tubular glomerular mechanism. And number four, the hormonal mechanism. We are going to learn it one by one. Before going to the mechanism, I am going to show you some anatomical structures. In this slide you can see that this is the renal corpuscle, this is the Bowman capsule, and this is the glomerulus. The Bowman capsule and the glomerulus are combinedly known as the renal corpuscle. This is the afferent arteriole and this is the efferent arteriole. The afferent arteriole is having a bit larger diameter and the efferent arteriole is having a bit smaller diameter. Just like other arterioles, the afferent arteriole also consists of muscular layer. Muscular layer is also over here and muscular layer is also over here, but this muscular layer is very important. That's why I have labeled it. Going to the second slide. Above the afferent arteriole there is a layer of muscular cell which is represented by green color over here. These are called juxtaglomerular cells. These are called juxtaglomerular cell because these are in junction with the glomerulus. Juxta mean in proximity with, and glomerular mean with glomerulus. So these cells are in proximity with the glomerulus. That's why that is called the juxtaglomerular cell. The juxtaglomerular cells are muscular cells which are present above the afferent arteriole near the glomerulus. Coming toward the next slide. In this slide you can see the structure of a nephron. This is the corpuscle which contains the glomerulus and the Bowman capsule. This is the proximal convoluted tubule. This is the descending tubule. This is the loop of Henle. This is the ascending tubule. This is the distal convoluted tubule, and this is the collecting duct. You can see different colored cell in this. In the previous slide I have told you that the afferent arteriole consists of these cells which are called juxtaglomerular cells, which are muscular cells. In this slide I was going to show you that almost all the nephron inside the kidney have their distal convoluted tubule in proximity with the renal corpuscle. You can see that this is the renal corpuscle and the distal convoluted tubule is near the renal corpuscle. You can see that this is almost in touch with the afferent arteriole, and the glomerulus are the cells in between the glomerulus. You can see over here these are another type of cells. So the distal convoluted tubule is always in proximity with the renal corpuscle. In the next slide you can see over here, this is the distal convoluted tubule, and this is one of the end of the distal convoluted tubule. You can see the side of distal convoluted tubule which is in contact with these cells, with the Lassus cells, are densely packed. The distal convoluted tubule, almost all over the distal convoluted tubule there are numbers of cells, large number of cells are there, but the number of cells on this side is in very high number, is densely packed. This side of the distal convoluted tubule is very densely packed. That's why this is called Macular Densa. Macula is the word derived from the spot. Macula means spot and densa mean dense. So if you observe the distal convoluted tubule or nephron microscopically through electron microscope, you will be able to see the dense spot at this point, and that this dense spot at this point will represent the macula densa. And this side of the distal convoluted tubule is highly packed, and this is the normal, these are normal cells, just like the cells on this side, at this side, but these cells are densely packed. That's why these are called macular densa. Similarly, in the previous slide, as I have told you, these are the juxtaglomerular cell. These are the juxtaglomerular cell, and these are the laces cell. The laces cells are also called Folkicin. The laces cells are also called Folkicin, or the laces cells are also called extramesangial cell. These are called mesangial cell or extramesangial cell. Mesangial cell. Mesangial cell is the word derived from meso and angial. So meso is for mid, in between, and angial mean angial from angi, from blood vessel. So the cells which are in between the blood vessels are called mesangial cell. Some mesangial cells are also present inside the glomerulus. Over here some mesangial cells are present which are called intramesangial cells, but I'm not going to discuss that. I'm going to discuss the extramesangial cells, which are also called laces cells, are in contact with the macula densa. Similarly, the laces cells are also in contact with the juxtaglomerular cells. Now coming towards the mechanisms. First of all, the myogenic mechanism. Myogenic mean which arise from muscles, which is generated from the muscles. So the mechanism which is initiated or which is orchestrated by the muscles is called the myogenic mechanism. So the myogenic mechanism is for the regulation of GFR and regulation of blood pressure. How? As you can see in this diagram, this is the afferent arteriole, this is the glomerulus, and this is the afferent arteriole. When the blood comes through this afferent arteriole into the glomerulus, the blood is filtered over here, and then some of the blood will reach the afferent arteriole. If the blood pressure is raised, when the blood pressure become high, the pressure of the blood against the wall of the afferent arteriole is increased. When the pressure of the blood against the wall of the afferent arteriole is increased, so this rise in blood pressure is detected by the special type of receptor inside this afferent arteriole, inside the wall of the afferent arteriole, which are called stretch receptors. When the blood pressure become high, the afferent arteriole is stretched. When the afferent arteriole is stretched, the stretch receptor inside the afferent arteriole detect that stretch. The stretch receptor detect that stretch, that rise in blood pressure. So what do the stretch receptor do? The stretch receptor are present inside each myocyte all around this afferent arteriole. Inside this afferent arteriole, the stretch receptors are present inside the myocyte. So those stretch receptors contract the blood vessel. Those stretch receptors contract the afferent arteriole without the interruption of any external body. Those stretch receptors contract these myocytes. When the myocytes are contract and the afferent arteriole, what happens? The amount of blood which goes to the glomerulus is decreased. The diameter of this afferent arteriole is decreased, so amount of blood which goes into glomerulus is decreased. So when the amount of blood which going into the glomerulus is decreased, what will happen? The amount of blood filtered into the Bowman capsule will be decreased, and the amount of GFR will be decreased. The normal GFR is 125 or 120, so that will be decreased. When the amount of GFR is decreased, what will happen? So the body will not lose the volume of blood. The body will not undergo the hypovolemia during raise in blood pressure. When the blood pressure is high, the GFR will not be increased from 125, and when the GFR is not increased from 125 due to myogenic mechanism, the amount of filtration will not be affected, the amount of blood filtered in the glomerulus will not be affected, so the volume of blood will not be lost over here. The second mechanism is the neural mechanism, the mechanism by which the blood pressure and the GFR is modified with the help of nervous system, with the help of neurons, that is called neural mechanism through kidney. So in this diagram you can see that this is the afferent arteriole, and above the afferent arteriole you can see the green colored cells. These cells are the juxtaglomerular cells, and you can see that just like many other arteriole, the afferent arteriole also consists of muscular layer, and those muscular layer are those smooth muscles contain alpha-1 receptor. The smooth muscle contain the alpha-1 receptors, while the juxtaglomerular cells contain beta-1 receptors. Both of these sympathetic receptors are sensitive to noradrenaline. So both of these sympathetic receptors contain the nerve ending, and those nerve ending comes from the thoracolumbar region of sympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic transmission secrete the noradrenaline over here into the alpha-1 receptor and beta-1 receptor. So the alpha-1 receptor and beta-1 receptor are activated during sympathetic outflow. So when the sympathetic nervous system is stimulated, the alpha-1 receptors are activated and the beta-1 receptors are activated. By the activation of alpha-1 receptor in the smooth muscle lead to the contraction of afferent arteriole. So when the afferent arteriole is contracted, the diameter of the afferent arteriole is decreased, and so what will happen, the blood supply to the glomerulus will be decreased and the glomerular filtration rate will be decreased, so the amount of blood which reach the kidney will be decreased, and the amount of blood will be transferred into the vital organs, and just like many other organs in the sympathetic nervous system stimulation, so the vital organ will receive large amount of blood and the kidney will receive small amount of blood due to what? Due to the contraction of afferent arteriole with the help of alpha-1 receptors. Similarly, the beta-1 receptor in the juxtaglomerular cell will be activated, and the activation of beta-1 receptors over here will lead to the secretion of renin. Renin are abundantly present inside the juxtaglomerular cell. So the juxtaglomerular cell will secrete the renin, and that renin will be transferred, that renin will be secreted directly into the blood vessel, and when the renin is secreted into the blood vessel, that will go to the systemic circulation. I'm going to show you the function of renin and the renin angiotensin aldosterone system later on at the end of this lecture, but you should know that the function of renin is also to increase the blood pressure, to decrease the diameter of afferent arteriole. I'm going to show you the function of renin later, but you should focus that the neuronal mechanism is the mechanism by which the sympathetic nervous system decrease the GFR, and by which the sympathetic nervous system increase the blood pressure. Third mechanism is the tubulo-glomerular mechanism, the mechanism by which the tubule and the glomerulus modify the GFR. It's called the tubulo-glomerular mechanism. In this diagram you can see that these are the cells which are known as Macular Densa. These are the cells which are known as the Lassus cells, and these are the cells which are known as the Juxtaglomerular cell. The combination of Macular Densa, Lassus cells and the Juxtaglomerular cells are called juxtaglomerular apparatus. Juxtaglomerular apparatus is the combination of these three types of cells. So the tubular-glomerular mechanism is orchestrated with the help of juxtaglomerular apparatus. So what does it do? When the blood pressure is increased, what will happen? The amount of blood which goes to the glomerulus will be increased, and when the amount of blood which goes into glomerulus is increased, the amount of blood filtered into the Bowman capsule will be increased. When the amount of blood filtered into glomerulus into the Bowman capsule is increased, the GFR will be increased. When the GFR is increased, what will happen? The blood will go to what? The blood will, I'm going to show you. So when the GFR is increased, the amount of plasma filtered to this way will be increased. When the amount of plasma or amount of filtrate is increased through this way, what will happen? These cells are called the Macular Densa. The Macular Densa is responsible for the detection of sodium ion. Sometimes the Macular Densa is also called the sodium loving cells, and these do not allow the amount of sodium to be excreted outside of the body. These do not allow large amount of sodium to be excreted from the body, and these also detect when the volume of filtrate is decreased, or when the amount of sodium is decreased. This is sensitive to decrease in the sodium concentration, or also sensitive to increase in sodium concentration. So when the sodium concentration is increased, what will happen? These the Macular Densa will detect large amount of sodium through this way. When the large amount of sodium going to this way, the Macular Densa will sensitize those increase in the sodium concentration, and the Macular Densa will transfer the signal to the lysis cell, and the lysis cell will transfer the signal to the juxtaglomerular cells. So when the Macular Densa activates, the lysis cells and the juxtaglomerular cells are also activated. The lysis cells and the juxtaglomerular cell will stop the secretion of nitric oxide. Actually, what happens when the nitric oxide secretion is increased by these cells, or when the nitric oxide, these cells are continuously secreting the nitric oxide, but during high blood pressure, the nitric oxide is in normal amount, in the optimum amount, but still in the high blood pressure, amount of blood going through this way is increased. So when the amount of blood which goes to this way is increased, the amount of filtrate is also increased, the GFR is also increased, the amount of sodium is also increased. So to decrease the amount of sodium to go through this way, the filtrate should be decreased. How the filtrate will be decreased? The Macular Densa inhibit these cells, the lysis cells and the juxtaglomerular cell, to stop the secretion of nitric oxide, or to decrease the secretion of nitric oxide. When these cells decrease the amount of nitric oxide, what will happen? When the nitric oxide secretion is decreased, the relaxation of these arteriole will be decreased. Actually, due to relaxation of the arteriole by the nitric oxide, the function of the nitric oxide is to relax the smooth muscles of the arteriole. The function of the nitric oxide is to relax the smooth muscle of the arteriole. So when the nitric oxide is inhibited, so the secretion of nitric oxide is inhibited, and that leads to the contraction of these arteriole. So the Macular Densa inhibit the lysis cells and the juxtaglomerular cell to secrete the nitric oxide. So the nitric oxide will be decreased, and when the nitric oxide is decreased, the relaxation is inhibited. So the relaxation is converted into contraction. So the diameter of the afferent arteriole will be decreased, and when the afferent arteriole is decreased, what will happen? The GFR will be decreased eventually. Similarly, the juxtaglomerular apparatus is also responsible for the RAS system. I will show you in the next diagrams. The fourth mechanism, the very important mechanism, is the hormonal mechanism. In the hormonal mechanism, the important one is the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, which is also called RAS system. The second one is the antidiuretic hormone, and the third one is the atrial natriuretic peptide. I will show you this one by one. I'm going to explain the RAS system first. As I have told you in the second mechanism, the neural mechanism, in which the beta-1 receptor was there in the juxtaglomerular cell, which were responsible for the secretion of renin. So the renin is having the vital role in the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. So the renin is secreted with the help of beta-1 receptor stimulated by the sympathetic nervous system. Similarly, the renin is also secreted by the juxtaglomerular apparatus. How? When the GFR is decreased over here, when the amount of blood flow is decreased into the glomerulus, or when the amount of sodium is decreased inside this distal convoluted tubule. So when the amount of sodium is decreased inside distal convoluted tubule, the Macular Densa will sense the decreased level of sodium, and it will transfer the signal towards the lysis cells and toward the juxtaglomerular cell to secrete renin. So the juxtaglomerular cells and the lysis cells both have large amount of renin, which will be secreted into the blood vessel directly, which will be secreted into the blood. When the renin is secreted into the blood, what will happen? That renin will be transferred to the glomerulus, and that renin will be transferred to the efferent arteriole, and that will go toward the systemic circulation. Now what will happen? As you know that the angiotensinogen is the inactive form of the angiotensin 1. So the angiotensinogen is synthesized inside the hepatocytes of the liver, that is continuously secreted into the blood vessel. So all over the body, the blood vessels contain large amount of angiotensinogen, which are synthesized by the liver. So the renin combine with the angiotensinogen, and when the renin combine with the angiotensinogen, what will happen? It will convert the angiotensinogen into angiotensin 1. So when the angiotensin 1 is synthesized over here from angiotensinogen, or when the angiotensinogen is converted by the renin to angiotensin 1, what will happen? That angiotensin 1 will travel to the systemic circulation, and eventually that angiotensin 1 will also reach the endothelial cells of the lungs, and the endothelial cells of the lungs contain large amount of ACE. ACE is a special type of enzymes. ACE are the angiotensin converting enzyme, which are present in large amount in the endothelial cells of the lungs, and some of the ACE are also present in the endothelial cells of the kidney also, but large amount of ACE are present inside the lungs. So the angiotensin 1 combined with the ACE, and the angiotensin 1 is converted by the ACE to angiotensin 2, and angiotensin 2 is the active form of this enzyme, which is having a vital role in the RAS system. That angiotensin 2 is transferred to each and every cell of the body, to each and every tissue of the body, but the receptor of angiotensin 2 are present where? The receptors of angiotensin 2 are present in large amount in the efferent arteriole. This is the efferent arteriole, and the angiotensin 2 combine with the angiotensin 2 receptor on the efferent arteriole, which leads to the contraction of the efferent arteriole. This is one side for the mechanism of the angiotensin 2 enzyme. So the angiotensin 2 enzyme combined with the angiotensin 2 receptor on the efferent arteriole to contract the efferent arteriole to decrease the GFR. So for the decrease of GFR, this diameter is decreased. The second site is this site. The angiotensin 2 receptors are present on the proximal convoluted tubule, and when the angiotensin 2 receptors are activated over here, what will happen? The proton sodium antiporter channel is open. The sodium proton antiporter channel is open, and the amount of sodium absorption will be increased. The amount of sodium absorption will be increased, and the secretion of proton will be increased. So the proton will be secreted into the tubule, and the sodium will be absorbed from the tubule. The absorption of sodium and the secretion of proton will take place over here in the proximal convoluted tubule due to the function of the angiotensin II receptor. That is called the sodium proton antiporter channel. So that is activated. So the amount of sodium absorption will be increased. When the amount of sodium absorption is increased, what will happen? The amount of the blood pressure will be raised. Okay, and now coming toward the third point. The third point is very important point. This is the adrenal gland, which is also called suprarenal gland, which is present above the kidney. This adrenal gland is having two major portions, the adrenal cortex and adrenal medulla. Adrenal medulla is the part of sympathetic nervous system, while the adrenal cortex is the part of hormonal system. So the adrenal cortex is having, for the three layers, the outermost layer is called zona glomerulosa. The outermost layer is called zona glomerulosa, and zona glomerulosa is having large number of angiotensin II receptor. So when the angiotensin II receptors are activated by the angiotensin II enzyme, what will happen? The angiotensin II receptor will activate the zona glomerulosa to secrete the aldosterone. The aldosterone will be secreted directly into the blood. Aldosterone is a special type of hormone that will travel toward the body, and that will combine with the receptor on the principal cells of the collecting duct. This is the aldosterone which will combine with the collecting duct. Inside the collecting duct, the special types of cells are there which are called principal cells, and with these will combine with the principal cells. The aldosterone will combine with this principal cell with the aldosterone receptors on the principal cells, and what will it do? It will increase the number of water channel. It will increase the number of water channel. It will increase the synthesis of water channel, and it will increase the number of water channel when the aquaporine 2 channel, these are called aquaporine 2 channel. The aquaporine 2 channel will be increased on the distal convolute on the collecting duct. When the aquaporine 2 channels are increased on the collecting duct, what will happen? It will lead to the increased absorption of water. It will increase the absorption of water to the collecting duct. So the aldosterone will do what? The aldosterone will increase the absorption of water from the distal convoluted tubule, and that will increase the volume of blood or the volume of plasma inside the body. That will increase the blood pressure. So this is the feedback mechanism. One more thing I am going to show you, that the ACE are present in large amount inside the lungs, inside the endothelial cells of the lungs. So nowadays some drugs are used to decrease the blood pressure, and those drugs are the ACE inhibitors. When those drugs inhibit the ACE, the angiotensin II formation will be stopped. When the angiotensin II formation is stopped, the blood pressure will be decreased automatically. As I have told you, the actual mechanism in this slide, that the GFR will be decreased. The angiotensin decrease the GFR, so increase the blood pressure. The angiotensin to increase the sodium absorption, so increase the blood pressure. The angiotensin increase the water absorption, so increase the blood pressure. So what are we doing with the angiotensin converting enzyme? The ACE inhibitor are the drugs which inhibit this enzyme. So when this enzyme is inhibited, the angiotensin II formation will be stopped. When the angiotensin II formation will stop, the blood pressure will be decreased. These are used in the hypertension, but the main adverse effect of the ACE is the one of the adverse effect, or one of the side effect of the ACE is the dry cough, because normally the ACE break down the bradykinin and the substance P which are present inside the lungs or inside the body. So normally when the bradykinins or substance P is formed inside the lungs, that bradykinin and that substance P do what? That increase the secretions inside the lungs, and that leads to the cough. So we do what? Normally that bradykinin and substance P is broken down by the ACE, and when we inhibit the ACE, what will happen? The bradykinin and the substance P will not be broken down. When the bradykinin and substance P is not broken down, what will happen? The dry cough will be there, because the bradykinin will increase the amount of fluid inside the lungs, that will lead to the cough. So the ACE inhibitor are associated with the dry cough. That is the mechanism.